Today, I'm honored to present you guys with a conversation with a repair industry expert and a good friend of mine, Darwin Garcia. Darwin has been in the electronics repair industry for over 27 years. Darwin started his career at Motorola in 1997 and has since worked his way to senior mechanical engineer. In addition to an extensive career at Motorola, Darwin worked hand in hand with other industry players like Jeremy Willis, Paul Walker from Samsung, and Michelle James, as well as many others, to help craft the industry's first wireless repair certification, which we know today as WISE. Darwin specifically oversaw and influenced the technical repair side of the certification, which has successfully trained thousands of techs across the US and now the world. The WISE certifications wouldn't be the same without his knowledge, expertise, and time. Today's sponsor is my company, XI Repair. If you need your device repaired or data recovered, check out xirepair.com. We are a WISE certified service provider that can help fix your cell phone, tablet, computer, laptop, and game console. We also offer an industry-leading warranty and have successfully fixed over 35,000 devices since 2018. So now on to my conversation with the one and only Darwin Garcia.
How's everything going on your end?
Going well, man. It's been busy. Obviously, running a repair shop, you stay busy. I've been trying to get this podcast rocking and rolling. The goal for me was really just to have. I felt like nobody was telling the stories of our industry. Like there's so many great people like you, Jeremy, Michelle, Paul Walker. You go down just a list of guys that are really like making strides in the industry that I feel like the people that are actually working in the industry have no clue how much effort's been put in and what's been done.
Right.
So yeah, I'm just trying to share those stories. Nothing formal, just getting to know people and letting the world kind of hear those stories.
Okay, no, absolutely. That makes sense. That's actually like what you're doing and the work and the fact that you are like I'll say middleman, but intermediary, someone in the middle between OEMs, independents, the industry, and trying to find the middle ground that we can all work together and we can all move forward, right? And there is not many people that are playing that role. So I do appreciate the fact that you are, and I'm sure you might take some pushback every now and then, right?
Yeah, of course.
Sure you will, but don't let down, right?
And I appreciate that. I appreciate
the motivation because this is, if you look at it long term, years to come, right? A lot of this connection between big manufacturers and small repair centers, a lot of it will be because the work you did. So, and the fact
well, thank you. That means a lot. And I saw that future many years ago, right? When we first started meeting with WISE, I kind of saw the direction it was going. But you bring up an important point. Like it is a perspective. I think some of the small independent shops, they've never manufactured something before. They have no clue about the manufacturing process. They don't understand the difference between the difficulties that you guys go through in just ordering parts. Like one of the things that came up on my last panel in the Austin event was that it was brought up that the OEMs have biggest problem with part availability is ordering enough parts whenever they manufacture a new product. Yes. And they made a good point, which is like the factories that they're contracted to do this work in, you know, it's cheapest to order 1 million for say iPhone 12 displays when the factory is set up to manufacture iPhone 12s. And so if you don't order enough, the cost of getting that factory to reset everything up and recalibrate all their tools to make more iPhone 12s a year or two later is significantly more expensive. Yeah. So I thought that might be a great place to start. I mean, you work at Motorola, you have some knowledge of the manufacturing process. Yes. Could you maybe give some insight to that and like how OEMs go about determining how many to order and just how difficult that can be?
Yeah, sure. Speaking with at least with some of the processes with the Motorola and many other companies work very similar. As you were saying, during the manufacturing phase of the product, which depending on the product may last a year or so, right? Give or take a few months. From the moment the product gets designed and the product gets into a ready to manufacture state, right? Even prior to that, all of the suppliers are getting ramped up, getting all the tooling necessary, all the raw materials to start filling the factories with all of the individual parts to begin this production, right? As this product gets manufactured, right, throughout this 1 year window, prices that our service groups, right, get for parts, for spare parts, it's at the same rate as the manufacturing, right? We share the same cost. So we're taking advantage of the mass volume to buy the prices, right? It'll get to a point where the product's about to hit the end of this manufacturing life, right? At the time of that manufacturing life, our suppliers will start doing some asking all of the purchasers, right, even within the company. Okay, now it's a good time to place your orders for your demands for the rest of the life of the product, right? Because before each of our sub manufacturers stop their production and shift their production lines to a new product, right? Once that happens, then trying to bring it back up, raw materials setting that up becomes costly. So we do try to get at that time, let me buy all of my needs, right? And my needs is determined on historical data, my customers, right? Each of the customers we might have, distributors, our internal and warranty, repair operations. We take all of those calculations and come up with a number per each individual part and place that order. Now, of course, there is still a estimation. So there are cases that we could be off in one direction, meaning that we have too many, off in the opposite direction that we have a shortage, right? And now, in an event of a shortage, that's when we go back to the supplier, right, of a specific component, and say we need to make more. Okay, they're going to charge us upfront cost, right? And the cost per unit is going to be higher, right? So at that point, when we look at the math and we look at what our consumers or direct customers are willing to pay for the part, it gets very at the edge of that price or even beyond that price, right? Because there are customers used to buying this component for $20, and when they need more, and I ask my suppliers, and they tell them it's going to cost me 25, right? And I'm selling it for 30. Now my customer 30, we used to paying 20. This 30 just doesn't make business sense because
Right.
I got to mark it up and sell it to a repair center to or independent, right? So that's where a lot of the challenge comes in, and something you hear me speak about in many of these conferences is about a long-term planning methodology from the industry to give us a better view of what this demand could look like, right? Not necessarily saying that you need to be liable for inventory, right? But it gives a better view, better opportunity to plan. So again, many of this industry have a lot of data, and I know sharing data is not common. Many are going to protect their secret sauce, right? But as an industry, we find some collaboration on parts planning. I think it'll help us all. So
Yeah, no, and like so on that note, I think a lot of the independent shops, sometimes where I get pushback is that the OEMs don't think about the independents. And I think the reason that they might think about that when it comes to parts is even those that have joined an OEM program like ISP with Samsung, there's been times where they don't have parts. And they might, the first thing that comes to an independent's mind is, oh, well, they're not thinking about me. When in reality, it was like, no, it was just they didn't have the best forecasting data to have enough parts because they didn't anticipate this demographic of customers that just happen to break their phone a lot,
right.
and so they didn't order enough. And so it's not that the OEM's against the independent or that the OEM doesn't want their device to be fixed. It's, as you said, they just didn't order enough, and they didn't do good enough job forecasting, which I can imagine with as many variables are that go into that equation, it's probably always going to be impossible to get
And
it accurate.
the way we talked about it in terms, there's a dark spot that we don't know in terms of data or the number of repairs being done on our devices, right? And we
Mhm.
know there's a percentage done with aftermarket parts, right? And we know a lot of them may get reconditioned and go sell to other markets, right? So for us, it's like a dark spot that is hard to plan for, right? You don't know how much demand is going to come out of that dark hole per se, right? We don't know what that demand going to be.
And well, the flip side is too, you make a phone that flops, it doesn't sell a lot, or you make a phone that has, for whatever reason, a customer base that just doesn't break it. and you're stuck with a ton of parts that are basically worthless after a few years. So from an OEM perspective, I can completely understand how that is such a difficult thing to juggle. And as you mentioned, I think the solution definitely is parts forecasting and having more data to go into that equation. So I think some people watching this might not know much about you or your background. And so I know you've worked at Motorola for almost freaking 30 years.
Yeah, almost 30 years.
How did you get into Motorola and how have you made it such a long career?
Well, I mean, first it started in 97, right out of school, right? I was finishing my technician degree at that point, right? So my roots were technician, not a smartphone at that time in 97, but I was a technician.
Was
Right.
that DeVry University?
Right. Yes, DeVry University out of Chicago. Right. Started my education there. The Motorola we used to come to do job fairs. Right. And I applied. Was I was finishing my technician. Right. And I got accepted. Got a job at one of the factories. Right. Assembling at that time. It was a base stations. Those are the stations that go on the roof to support cellular communication. So I started with that in 97, and then they sponsor me or pay for my rest of the education to get a bachelor's in engineering. Right. So started with that in 2004. Right. I moved to the mobile division, the cellular division. Right. Back in 2004. That time, my first job was field return engineering. Meaning, I used to get the field returns, do analysis of what was wrong with them, and go back to design groups to see what were the corrective actions for that product or the next generation.
So when you say field returns, you mean is this like a corporate partnership with Motorola and businesses? They send their phones back to you guys and you would like diagnose them, like triage them?
We would triage them. Yeah. For example, if your customer has a problem, they'll return the device and either to the carrier or to us. I will get those devices, get some samples, and do failure analysis right on them. That was the the job at the time. Then when we first launched the V3, the first Razr, right? I was part of that field team, right? Hey, we need to send people to do this field analysis, but it had to be on site because the first plan, that product wasn't intended to be as higher volume as it was. It was only a few 100,000 that were going to be made and shipped, right? And that product was designed to be very complex, very unique design, right? And very complex, but very, very small amount of volume. But as the product took off and the major success that he had, most old school timers know the story, right? It was the product for many years worldwide, right? I don't remember the final numbers if it was 300 or 400 million that were sold, right, at that time.
And this is like pre-iPhone, you know,
pre-iPhone,
for those who don't, are too young to know, this was like before the touchscreen, really, right?
Yeah, before touchscreen, the first flip, right? And then being part of that field team, right, field support team, then I was put with another group of engineers, about 5 of us, and we were doing travel. We were used to go to Europe, Latin America, in the US, Asia, and go do failure analysis on site because it wasn't feasible to send all those samples. And also our customers, the carriers, they wanted feedback right away, right? So during those 2 years, I traveled the world, went to every country you can think of, right? Doing just that work. From Europe, I mean, Germany, London, Taiwan, China, Japan. It was amazing doing those back in
What was that like? So when you went on some of those trips, what were some like crazy things that you encountered in your field operations?
Well, a lot of that was culture because it was my first time doing that much travel. So it was the knowing new cultures, right? And having the group of co-workers that we became friends, just traveling around. It was very fun to say it, right? A lot of good stories, some fun, some not so much, but right. So, but then at the output of that travel, once that came down, it was about a year and a half. Glad I was not married, right, and had no kids, so I had no family challenges, right? Because I'm sure no wife will accept that, right? That much trouble, but then the output of that when I came back is reported back to my leadership. Right? These are the number of challenges and issues, right, that we see with the product, but also the repair processes, right? It's a very difficult product to repair, right? The way the parts are coming in are not easy to assemble, requires a lot of tools, the instructions are not clear, right? I gave a whole suite of feedback that I got from all of these repair centers that were collecting these returns around the world, right? Long list, and met with my leadership and answered, yes, what you're saying, we are getting similar feedback from our regional repair centers, right? Blah, blah, blah. Fine. I'm doing my job, right? I gave my output of that report. 2 weeks later, that time my director, right, sets up a meeting with my manager, and he says, we're building a new team, right, to handle the challenges that you highlighted. And I thought maybe they needed my input. No, they said, you're responsible now for that team. And
is this 2004 still, or are we 2005, 2006?
Around that 2006, trying to remember, 2006, 2000, somewhere around there. And the first question he asked me, what do you want to name it? And I said, design for service. That's
Design
where
for
that
service.
design for service, right?
Huh.
And you're going to be responsible for fundamentally to me 2 aspects of this. One, product design from a service perspective, and second, repair operation from an engineering perspective. What does that mean? Is that from a product design, the R&D groups and the manufacturer were working on the silos, right? They were designing. They knew there was some repair requirements. It was maybe a document that maybe they read once a year, right? Oh, there's some requirements that we need to meet for service. But outside of that, there was no voice from a repair perspective in the R&D camp, right? So that was one of my main number one jobs, right? You're responsible. You are the voice of in the R&D, right? And second, for all the repair operations, the engineering, like the work instruction, the bombs, the repair tools, right? All of that need to be reshaped to meet the next generation of models. So I want to make sure that you, with your team, develop the necessary tools, processes, whatever is needed to have a more efficient repair process, better instructions, better bombs, more sub-assemblies, more tools, whatever else is needed, training, anything that's required is going to fall under the DFS umbrella, right? So there was a shock. Right? My manager said, "Okay, well, we got a big job in our hands, and now let's start building a team." Right. The first task was the design because the R&Ds we're a very close community, right? And going to the design group, say, let's do this, do that, right? Easily they could throw the science or the physics book at you, and your request out the window, right? So I had to go back to school, right? Not for maybe a few semesters, right? Get more familiar in terms of product design, mechanical design, modeling, physics, right? So be more prepared on when I had those conversations, right? We experts in product design that I could challenge them, right? Hey, yes, I understand why you designed it this way, but you have this side effects, right? There's other approaches, not necessarily design it for them, but be able to stay in the game in that conversation, right?
Mm.
And that was to me the first 2 years was the biggest uh, growth, right? In terms of that, I learned product design not just from a engineering perspective, but also from a company, how they work, what were the leverages that we had, right? So that was one aspect that's today is still the core of the job, right? Is design for service. And the second part was the repair processes, right? All of these service centers around the world, we need a more stable, more consistency. So then I was
And
assigned.
if I may ask and interject, so you said you went to a lot of countries. How many service centers or Motorola service departments did you guys have around the world at that time, approximately?
Approximately close to 200 to 300.
My gosh.
Right.
So I mean, and I guess it makes sense too, because like you guys were well, you were number one at that point, right? Like
Right.
with the Razr and everyone in the Motorola products at that time, y'all were killing it. So y'all were like, the apples of today.
Right.
That's crazy. Wow.
Yeah.
All right, continue.
No, so then the second part of the job was okay, repair instructions. Your team needs to write them, so we had hired technical writers, right? Had a group of engineers that will create a instruction that was easy to understand for repair centers. The BOM, the weight, all the parts needed to be sub-assembled to make it easier to repair. My team handles that, or we handle that. We do still today, right? All of the hardware tools, assembly, disassembly, jigs, and stuff of that nature became the responsibility of my group at that time. Not my group, but my managers and me and the rest of us. I was still very young. Still at that time, I was probably maybe late 20s, right? You're not as mature as others like yourself, but still was in my 20s, right? So that's where the journey to mobile repair begun, right? I was getting assigned that task. And today, 20 years in the same space, right? It's gave me a lot of opportunities, a lot of learnings over the years in not just product design, repair operations, right? Over the years, the job expanded to complex repair processes, right? That included the screen replacement glass, delamination, lamination. We started that back in 2010, doing that type of operations. We do board level repair, to glass polishing, to liquid glue dispensing, to waterproof coating, anodizing recovery. We used to strip the anodizing out of the metals and refinish it at repair locations. You know, that's for refurbishment, right? Because those anodizing houses were expensive.
Right. And this is under Motorola. This is not
Mhm.
subcontracted work. This is in-house refurbishing teams.
Yes, yes. Of course, some of them were partnerships with other bigger manufacturers, other bigger, right, warehouse or facilities. But yes, but I was the responsible from the development of those processes. Years. So it gave me a lot of experience, not just on the basic repair, but beyond the more complex repairs.
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
and just to finish that, man, 20 years in the industry today, I'm known as the voice of repair. That's been my name from the last 20 years, right? Great relationships with all of the different design groups that remain today. Um,
Including outside Motorola, if I may.
yes,
Paul Walker with Samsung has a lot of respect for you. I know the
yes.
Apple team has a lot of respect for you. So that's kudos to you. It says a lot about your character and how many years you've worked and the reputation you've built.
So at the end, it comes down to being the voice of the repairs, at least within Motorola and outside, right? So that at the end has been my 20 years. And I know you may ask, I know job jumping that you see around the industry, right? One of the things I learned about that is that back in my maybe about 10, 12 years ago, I was in a decision. I can either go the corporate letter or go the subject matter expert path. And I had two choices to make, right? I discussed with many other friends and other people that are more mature at that time. I mean, right, more experience, and got some input trying to decide what was the best for me. And I chose the subject matter expert, being an expert in my field, and not necessarily the corporate letter, the executive director, all of that chain, right? I
Right.
realized that at that time, I was my best long-term future was on the expert side and not on the corporate letter side.
Mm.
And that actually helped me throughout the years still maintain the same role within the company. So,
And that's why I was so fascinated when I did a little research and saw your resume. You see so many people today work, I don't know what the average is, but 4 or 5 years at a company, some up to a decade, but they've almost always have kind of a migration path in a different direction. And so whenever I see a resume like yours, it always stands out to me because I go, wow, like it in some ways does prove that there's multiple ways you can be successful in any career.
right,
But to your point, staying with one company and becoming an expert in one particular field really can work wonders for your career.
right, absolutely. And one director told me at one time, right, you could replace a manager anytime. You cannot replace an expert anytime.
Mm.
Back to me, that was probably the one single advice that made me go down that path, right?
Mm.
Any field and anywhere you go, you could replace the manager, you could replace the owner, right? You could do that, but the expert that is required for that job to be done, you can't replace that.
Right. Right. What year did you so you said you joined the service department, or you essentially created it inside of Motorola. When did you guys internally have like a hard launch of the service department, and what did that look like? Did you guys start doing more specific types of repairs? Do you remember like what year that was where you went from?
But around 2005 and 6, even though at that time there was an overall service organization, there were material planners, there were operational teams, because we have two, so I was mentioning 200 to 300 service centers. So there was a large team managing those vendors, right? Enabling those vendors. So there was a lot of that. What was missing was the engineering behind that,
Mm.
the key of the repair operation that was missing. We had the footprints, we had the contracts, all of the vendors, right? But what that was missing, what that it was that the engineer. That was the feedback from all of the strips that I gave back to my leadership at that time. Yes, we have a lot of repair operations, great operations, very efficient, but the engineering is lacking in a lot of that stuff. For example, one example was is on the Razr, the B3, in order for you to replace the screen, you had to assemble 20 small adhesives and gaskets, and he was taking a repairs technician 10, 15 minutes to pull them all together. And said, why don't we pre-assemble this to the screen, right? None of those sub-assembly processes were in place, right? So a lot of that engineering logic behind it was missing. And that's
Hmm.
what this DFS fit that role or address that gap.
Do you remember if around that time other OEM companies were repairing the way you guys did? I mean, this was before my time, so I don't know, but I would take a guess. I would assume that a lot of
Yeah.
companies were they replacing screens like that?
Yes, a lot of them were. In that time when we were talking about Nokia was the other major OEM, right? And we had other devices like item devices and like and other brands at that time, right? But yeah, most of them were doing the same in terms of the repair network, right? It was very safe. In outside of the US, it's a lot of walking repair networks, especially in LATAM, right? Other countries we got more of a mailing program. Here, the US is the few that we have exchange program, which means the carriers are the ones that handle most of the customer interface. In
Hmm.
parts of the world, Motorola handles that interface with the customer. So the
Hmm.
customer doesn't go to the carrier; it'll go directly to the manufacturer. So it allows more opportunities to have for different processes to
Hmm.
support that direct to consumer. Here in the U.S., most of it goes through the carrier channel. The carrier handles the transaction or even the insurance. If you're claiming an insurance, right, it still goes through the carrier. Very few of those transactions go OEM directly to customer. At least on the Motorola side, I know other OEM have a different approach, right? Such as Apple, right? But at least in our specific case, that's how it's been for pretty much all of this time.
So the V3 came out. I don't remember the year, 2004, 2005. Do you remember
Yeah,
the years?
yeah,
I think the most recent 2024 version is the Razr Plus. Um,
yes,
there's been a lot of change between those two devices, especially when it comes to repairability. I mean, if we compared side by side, the screen, the battery, the ports, the type of ports that are used, the speakers. I mean, you could go down the whole list, and every part is virtually completely different.
yeah.
Talk a little bit about how Moto has approached the changes in its evolution with in terms of repairability.
Yeah. So the after the first race, we had a couple of more devices in that form factor. But then after a few, we went away with that form factor, became more of the candy bar style of product design, right? And it stayed like that for almost 10 plus years before the Razrs came back in 2020, right? And yes, it was a challenge from service for design for service perspective, right? Because we were had to battle design requirements, reliability requirements, right? Manufacturing requirements, supply chain restrictions or limitations, and so on, in order to fit in the repairability aspect. So that product took that time almost 80% of our time because the complexity and all of the trade-off we have to make with R&Ds on this, right? If we do this, I need a way to repair this or more economical. I need solutions for this, solutions for that. So it was a challenge. Even to today, there's still a challenge of our product, right? But we make strides in trying to find the best service option, um, maintain the cost of the parts as feasible as possible, right? Not put too many together. But so we're trying to find the right balance, right, within the product, but also brought challenges with the product design. Because they got, we need to flip cycles, we need to do this reliability testing, we need to pass. So I need to add stronger adhesive. I need to do this and do that, right? And we have to find those middle grounds. So that still remains a big part of the job, right?
Apple, I believe, started their independent repair provider program in 2018, 2019 in the US. And a lot of people would say, and also people forget that at that same year, they also started allowing in Apple Store replacements, meaning you could go in and get a screen repair done at like a local Simply Mac or a local Apple Store. That was 13 years after you guys were already repairing screens. I mean, looking back, to me, it kind of makes sense now why Motorola, in my opinion, has had such a repair-friendly relationship with the industry, because you guys had so many more years ahead of, like, I mean, just the expertise of seeing the practicality of how you have to repair things and how difficult a manufacturer can, certain design trade-offs can make, you know, a screen replacement 10 times harder. So maybe talk about a little bit about, or maybe confirm my assumption that because you guys had so many years ahead of these OEMs, you guys were able to make, in my opinion, a more superior repair program. Because today, independents like myself can get Moto parts from many suppliers. It's not like that with Samsung or Apple currently. The guides are published online for a lot of these Moto products. I mean, is my assumption correct there, that you guys just kind of had a head start in seeing where this was going and why you guys chose to take a different path?
Well, to an extent, yes. So I mean, we've been in this industry very long time. The first phone call gave out a Motorola device. It's a lot of learning lessons, right? Can speak, of course, for other manufacturers, but for us, that helped us. And also the fact that different business strategies that enable groups like myself to be more flexible on what options we can offer the repair industry, right? I think it became more of a flexibility, right? Okay, we understand what other manufacturers are doing, right? Because we may not know all the reasons behind that, right? Why they make the decisions they do, right? From our perspective, right, we have a little bit more flexibility, myself and other teams, to say, okay, how do we want to shape these repair industry in terms of access to part documents and tools, right? So the way I kind of see it, yes, it's a lot of experience that we have within Motorola on this, but a big part of that was flexibility, right? That we were able to get within the company in allowing us to shape how this will look like, right? How this, parts, how would this look like in overall? And it took some battles internally to overcome. Back in 2018, we were the first ones to establish a relationship with iFixit, right? To do self repair. When you brought that subject of customers repairing your own devices, you could see legal guys' jobs dropping. You can see quality engineers, leadership jobs dropping. Literally,
Yeah.
you can see R&D jobs dropping when you bring that subject. So you can just imagine that meeting to trying to get that program ahead. First, be done through legal. Once we got through that, through quality, through lab, anything you can think of, right? But we made it through. We made it through that journey, right? Of enabling self-repair guide. We know it's not um, many customers don't repair their own devices, but still, right? Just getting to that huddle shows the flexibility that teams that within the represented the repair industry had within the company, right? To overcome legal teams, to overcome the quality teams, and many other things that we just did not see it as it doesn't make sense while we're doing this, right? Um, and then at the same time, be able to we can sell parts to this industry. And I think in 2018 or 17, we started a relationship with distributors such as Mobile Centrics and selling parts to them, selling parts to iFixit, right? So at that time, we were able to overcome internal hurdles so to be able to open the doors in terms of access to parts and the self repair guides, right? But I think
Do
at the
you
end, it came down to having more internal flexibility to shape that.
do you remember what supplier was first and what year that was? Because if I recall, I believe it was. I could be wrong, but at least from my perspective, I thought it was Mobile Defenders, which did become Mobile
Yeah,
Centrics in
yes,
maybe 2018.
mobile defenders, right? It's
Was that
mobile,
y'all's first third party
yes.
non self repair distributor?
Yeah, I think if I'm recollection is correct, yes, it was Mobile Defender that then was acquired by Mobile Centrics, right? For them, it was a part distribution. We were selling them OEM parts, right, back in 2018. That's when it started. And with iFix, it was more focused on the an end user self-service, right? Kind of the two different angles, right? One more served to distribute parts to repair centers like yourself, right? And the other one's for those consumers that were techy enough to fix their own device, right?
Yeah. Well, interesting enough, that's actually so in Montgomery, Alabama, where my service center is, we actually have a pretty decent Motorola user base, and they used to come into our independent repair shop, and that's actually how I started buying from Mobile Defenders at the time, because I remember customers asking for the genuine parts or saying like, "Hey, I saw this online. I wanted to come in and see if you could get this exact part," and they might reference the iFixit genuine part that they could purchase online. So I've always had an admiration for y'all's company simply just because of the approach that you took. As far as I'm concerned, the best repair program, or as you would say, design for service program, is a program that's built ground up to be self-repaired. It doesn't mean that the customer will repair the majority of the products. We know that's not true.
Yeah.
But if there are artificial barriers that would prevent even the customer repairing the device, those artificial barriers only make it harder for internal, third party, and even the customer to repair the device, thus ultimately making it less affordable, less accessible,
Mhm.
and just less digestible for the customer. I think even going back to 2018, as an independent shop, we have an interesting perspective on the relationship between the customer, the OEM customer, and the OEM itself, where we see when that device is broken, how frustrated the customer is, not directly at us, but at the OEM, based on how difficult that part can be to repair. Without saying names, or other OEMs that we work with, where sometimes we need an ear speaker or a particular part, they can be very difficult to get because they don't have these third-party distributor relationships where I can just overnight something or get something ordered like I can with Moto. So here's some feedback from customers on your behalf. 10 out of 10 from every Moto customer in terms of repairability, simply because when they have an issue, they can walk into pretty much any shop in America and have a part overnighted to that local store and know what the price is going to be up front. And that's been a win since 2018. 6 years later, I think it's still a big win for Moto. And I know for a fact there are customers that have said, I will never use another company or never buy another device from a different OEM because the ease of repairability with a Moto device is superior to my experience with having to drive all the way to an OEM service provider. So kudos to you guys for building that.
Thank you. Appreciate the feedback.
Yeah, no, seriously. So, but yeah, that's really awesome. I think a lot of repair shops, they see the genuine, like as an independent, Motorola was the first genuine part that we could buy if we weren't a independent service provider with Apple or Samsung or one of these other companies, which didn't launch till after you guys just straight up started giving parts away. There was nothing we had to join. There was no like, certification requirement or anything. It was just here's what you need to get started. You need to have a business license if you want to buy from one of these third-party distributors. And I think that was a big win for you guys.
Yeah. And even to start, once we overcame that hurdle, right, back in 2018 and 19, then we had the flexibility to kind of reshape what was coming forward, right? In terms, then during those times, prior to COVID, right, you start hearing the movements around repair legislations, right, to repair and other laws in other regions begin to shape, right? And what that did is, okay, we know this is coming, there might be some legislations, right, around this. How do we move forward, right? Now that we have overcome some internal challenges, right? Now we have this more open notebook to shape how this will look like in years to come, right? And that's what by flexibility was a huge here. Me and others draw it, right? What would this look like, right? And that allow us to be more flexible in terms of, okay, how do we want to distribute? Okay, let's open it up to all the distributors, right? Today, not just mobile centrics, you can buy parts through iFixit. There are other distributors, right, that you can buy parts from, right, that are access to us. So we're opening it up to distributors, right? Anybody that meets the right business conditions, of course, can buy parts from us, right? To give you more options to this repair industry, right? And again, as part of that, we created our right to repair landing page, right, where you can access documents that are posted on the mobile centrics portal. You go there, you can download a BOM, you can download a level 2 manual, assembly, disassembly. And for those that are willing to go into ball repair, you could download schematics, right?
So break down what a BOM is for those that don't know, because
It's
some
a
people.
service bill of materials. It's a spare part list.
Yeah.
Right. So you can access those documents because we understood that's going to help those repair technicians. When they read those documents, they'll understand them. An end user might not, but a technician will understand those documents, right? And give them access to that. In addition, access to more parts, access to software tools, right? You can download a tool that we call Software Fix that allows you to reflash devices to the latest, allows you to do some recovery. If your device is not operation, you can do some backup, along with many other features, right? So we access to the software tools, and most recently access to disassembly tools. Normally, those tools were provided via our tools manufacturer, right? Meaning that you had to buy these tools and you had to get them shipped, and that requires logistics and back-end support. And we're shifting more to 3D printing approach.
Yeah, so talk about that partnership a little bit. I think some people in our industry would be aware of the company you guys have partnered with and might already know how to 3D print some things.
Yes, started maybe let's say about a year ago in one of the conferences. Met Brad from Red Wolf, right? Great guy, right? And I saw what he was doing in terms of the cases, right? And I said that's very interesting that you can go ahead and bring your own case. He showed me what the printers were doing, and then in parallel internally we were looking at 3D printing for a lot of the assembly tools, such as adhesive alignments, specific adapters that are required to properly close the phone, right? And we were looking at 3D printing, not necessarily at what Brad was doing, but more for our internal repair operations, right? And we can put a printer, but then as we go through that, these printers are not as easy as plug and play, right? You don't just put in a design file and hit print. It's not like a printer here at home, right? There is some science behind 3D printing, right? On what it takes, not just here's a file, print it. No, it's a lot more behind that. Right? We were learning that internally, right? And then in that conference, I was thinking my team's already designing the files, right? And he has a 3D printer, so then I approach him about, hey, we have the file. How about if we find a way to for your printers to support our designs, right? And it was just a brainstorm, and he got excited about that, right? And then we start having some further discussions, right? And say, well, let's start this partnership, right? And he came because he participated in a lot of these conferences, right? I seen him right in the smartphone repair space, right? It was a great opportunity to give more access to our tools. If you have his printer, right, we'll install the files in his platform and you'll be able to print. And if you, for a reason, don't want to invest in the printer solution, you can have him print it and ship to you at a
Mm.
reasonable cost, right? And we'll do all the design of those files upfront. And that's where the kind of the synergy came. For me was um, continue down the path. We want the repair industry to repair our products, but repair them with high quality, right? Repair them with uh, high quality with OEM parts and so on. That's our desire. And we know access to tools is a challenge, right? They can be costly, right? And that's what this partnership allow us to move in that direction, right? Now you can 3D print this jigs, or you can order them from them. And also said that this is a path that as an industry we can move. At least within Motorola, I can speak for other OEMs, providing tools, this hardware tools for assembly, disassembly. That's not really a profit generating business. It's more of a headache, right? I got to subcontract vendors, check their design, do the fixtures work. Then I got to plan, warehouse them, and ship them to the repair centers or to someone that's going to sell them. From an OEM perspective, that is not a profitable thing to say. Yeah, there's maybe some margins on the tools. It's more of a headache, to be honest with you.
Of course.
Managing that is more, if you if I can take that away and get 2D printing 100% of my tools right around the world, I'll be happier than ever. I got to manage this whole tooling, design, and testing, and so on, right? So,
Right.
so that's kind of I saw 3D printing could be a win-win, right? As instead of trying to sell these tools, let them 3D printing, right? And we'll do the engineering to make sure that the files are designed for 3D printing, right? And that's what the journey began. So far, I think it's going great, right? We plan to expand to Europe, hopefully next year, right? With some
So
of the
what are,
population.
if I may ask, what are the specific tools that can be printed now? It's mainly jigs to hold the
Jigs.
devices during repair.
Yeah. So,
Is
for
there
example, when you want to assemble a back cover
yeah,
onto the phone, you need to put an adhesive on the back cover, right?
yeah.
This jig will help you put the adhesive on the jig with some alignment posts and help you precisely place the back cover on the jig and align that adhesive correctly. One of the things I saw in one of the repair centers was they were trying to do this manually, right? And maybe a good operator was 90% of the time he got it right the first time, and the other 10% he had to go peel off the adhesive and go get a new one. So the moment it stick, you're done. You don't have a second chance, right? With some of these adhesives, right? So then I realized the cost of that adhesive, let's say from an independent, right? What is the cost of the adhesives for the back cover on any OEM? It's probably $2, $3 at the lowest end, right? Just the adhesive. So every time you get a run, your technician gets to run, that adhesive is wasted. So when you look at the in total, right? If you 100% of your adhesive is consumed correctly during the assembly process, you have no waste adhesives. That's secret. That's money that is not going down the drain.
Right.
You cannot see it. I don't know how detailed inventory controls some of the stores might have. You may order 1,000 adhesives and you consume them in a month. You maybe 10, 20% of those adhesives never were trial and error that were thrown away, right? So with this jig helps make that a more consistent and accurate process. So to me, I saw it as a win for the repair center. You're more accurate in the placement of these things, so you don't waste them. So I know they're valuable to you, right? For us, it may be a few cents. For you, it's $1 or $2, and that makes an impact when
Mm.
you add them all up, right? So
Yeah.
and those jigs through Red Bull very affordable. And if you have their printer, it's just click and print, right?
Yeah. And it's also lowers the cost because a lot of shops and even some technicians, like we have a couple of technicians that have 3D printers at home. I'll put a video in this podcast video, and I'll send it to you after this call. But they've printed a couple cool things for themselves. Like actually, my spouse's brother, he's a really big Naruto fan. I might be butchering that. It's like the Japanese character. TV show. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but he has a 3D printed Naruto solder ball holder. So like we would do soldering at the shop, and he holds the little solder balls for them. And each desk has a couple of different cool things that are like that are 3D printed. So the point is, it makes it more accessible because a lot of shops already have the capabilities to print these jigs. Just having the guides available, the models available from you guys opens up the possibilities significantly. It also goes back to what we talked about when we first started this podcast, which is like, estimating how many orders you're going to need. Well, if it's a 3D printable, it's not a concern of yours anymore because, well, we've released the models. The demand can be endless. It could be one model, it could be printed, or it could be a million printed, depending on what the demand is. So it shifts that responsibility to the repair shop owner just to do the work of printing it, which, and to me, is the model that this should be.
Yeah. And we're trying to show this is an opportunity for the industry to move in this direction, right? Because it'll ease not just the cost of the service centers, but make it more accessible, right? And again, to me, I strive the quality of the repair, right? We strive.
Especially, sorry, go ahead.
No, go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say, especially with OEMs like Motorola. As a repair shop owner, one of my only dissatisfactions with Motorola is that there are so many models, right? And that's the same with Samsung and a lot of the OEMs. I think Apple is one of the few that has kind of like a a preset 3 or 4 models a year that they're pushing per product line. And so because of that, trying to buy a jig for every single one of them would be very costly if it was an OEM equivalent, because we pay quite a bit for the jigs that come with Apple devices, for example, but we only need for a year, so it's not too costly. But no, that I definitely love the approach. And would you say that was completely handled by your design by service
Yes.
team? Wow,
Yes.
that's incredible.
So we did. My team, I got a couple engineers that were doing the actual design. They'll design, they'll print, and then once they're ready, I'll share them with Red Wolf, and they take it from there. So
that's awesome. That's really awesome. So I know we're getting close here on time. I had just a few more quick questions I wanted to ask you. I'm sure you've got other things to do today other than sit here and talk to me. But what was some of the things that, you've worked at Motorola for 30 years. What are some things that, like, people that are not inside the OEM or have the OEM perspective, what are some things that you think might shock them? Like, what are some of the biggest little known secrets or just facts about how the OEM process goes that you think is important for independent repair shops and non-OEM affiliated people to know about?
well, it is a very complex operation to manufacture a product, right? And having the voice of service, when you think about a product design, you have not just cost, you got reliability, you got R&D, you have quality, you have supply chain, many other factors driving that design, right? And having design for service being part of that has become a big win in terms of, and that's one of the things outside independence, and the feel I get is that we're one big evil monster, right? That's not necessarily how it operates internally, right?
Sure.
There are many voices within these manufacturers, these OEMs, that are speaking on the behalf of the independents, right? and some may have bigger voices than others, right? Believe at least with the Motorola, we have a bigger voice, right? We have and allow us to do things a bit different, right? So that's today the key, that there are voices within the OEM that are looking for the best interest of the repair network as a whole, and including the independents, right? And there are challenges that we face internally to make some of the solutions available to the independent, right? So it's not just one big person making all the decisions. No, there's a lot of in company battles to get to some of the solutions. In some cases, we'll lose those battles. It's just a fact of life in big corporations, right? But in others, we'll win, and we're able to deliver like the 3D printing solution, right? That took some internal discussions, some or overcoming some challenges, right? But we make through that, and you're seeing the output of some of that work. So always think about it. That it's not just one big mad brand. You see, no, there's a lot of voices within it that we need to continue as an industry giving voice, giving stronger, so they speak on behalf of the repair networks within their own company. So
I think that's such an important perspective to highlight, and I'm glad that's what you picked, because you're right. A lot of independents don't get that, and it's just from ignorance of not being in the OEMs, right? Not manufacturing a product, not seeing how complicated that is, and how there are a million different voices that, I said at the Austin Summit that I think there's a war between novelty and repairability. And I think that might sum up what you said well, too, because you are coming from it as design for service. Your team is saying, look, we want to make this as serviceable as possible. But the marketing team's over here saying, no, we need this to be as sexy as heck. So we sell more products, because if we don't sell the products, there's no point of it being serviceable in the first place. Right. And so it's kind of this battle of, well, we need it to look cool and be great and sell, but we also need it to be serviceable when it does sell. And I'm sure that's a never ending battle. Yes. Going back and forth internally. Yeah.
No, that's true.
I was gonna say, I don't know if you've ever seen any of Marques Brownlee. I think is how you pronounce his name. He's like a YouTuber that does tech videos. Mm-hmm. African American guy. He does awesome tech videos. But he got the opportunity to actually sit down with John Ternus, which is I think he's the VP of engineering over at Apple. And I wanted to bring up kind of a quote from that interview where John said that Apple's perspective on repair is that they should make a product that doesn't essentially need to be repaired in the first place.
Sometimes, for me, I find it helpful to kind of think about the bookends. Like, if you imagine a product that never fails, right? That just doesn't fail. Yep. And on the other end, a product that maybe isn't very reliable, but is super easy to repair. Right. Product that never fails is obviously better for the customer. It's better for the environment.
Okay, it's interesting you put it that way, because on one end you have the product that never fails. On the other hand, you have the product that can be replaced infinitely, but it's not as reliable.
Yep.
That downside of being not as reliable comes from being infinitely repairable. But I think some would argue that the downside of being really hard to repair comes from being almost infinitely durable.
And I wanted to maybe give you the opportunity to contrast that with Moto, because it seemed from our conversations, it seems like that is part of the equation, but it's also maybe a little bit different in terms of how your design for service team views how to make products serviceable. Would you agree with that statement, or do you take a little bit of a different approach?
No, yes, of course. Designing a product with high quality, high reliability is at the top of the mind, because at the end, we don't want the customers to go through the experience of his device failing, whether it is a failure within the functional failure or a failure because of an incident of a drop or water spill, right? We don't want the customer to have to go through a repair process, right? Nobody wants to send their car to the dealer to get a fix, right? Or to the mechanic. So of course, we will design the products to be as reliable as possible. However, we understand even with the new technologies and trying to make these phones as attractive as the ID, there will be some challenges, new technologies, new components. There's going to be some failures, right? Customers are going to continue to have accidents with them, right? Going to drop in as tough as the glass can be, it's still going to crack at some point, right? And so we still have to find the right balance that drive for high quality, drive for high reliability, but we have to have serviceability, having the equal weight, right? And one of the things that my team is able to do is understand those reliability parameters, right? The testing that is done, how's that, and what are the opportunities, and work with the R&Ds in this brainstorming session. Okay, that's one of the things I learned early in this journey, right? Once you can speak their physics, remember, I'll go back to my initial point. I had to go learn physics back. I had to go mechanical engineering, right, in order to speak the same language, right? And find, okay, it could be something as simple as changing the tooling, make it more strong here, and allow this feature for me to be able to remove the battery. Be able to go down to that level of discussion at the drawing board, allow us to find those middle ground. You can still meet your reliability requirements, your quality requirements, but if you do this, you can still achieve reparability. So finding that middle ground in most of the cases is how we kind of look at this, right? Um, and focusing on that aspect from my engineers is a top priority because it challenges every new generation of product will have its own set of challenges and new technologies, and there's new features and looks on these devices. So you look at it from that perspective, right? Being able to speak that language, because the reality is that the designers of the phones, right, the reliability teams, right, they're not familiar with the repair industry, right? They don't know the struggles a repair center will go, even within in warranty repair, right?
Right.
So now being able to feed that back and be able to be on the drawing board and talk about brainstorm for solutions, right, gives us gives us a plus. At least my team, and come, okay, there'll be some cases where it's just not possible to add this additional feature to make it more serviceable. You win some battles, you lose some battles, right? But the fact that we're always in the fight gives us the opportunity, product after product, to make it as repairable as possible without sacrificing quality and reliability. So
That is such a healthy and, quite frankly, realistic perspective. I wish everyone in the industry shared that, because I think we would all, at the end of the day, I always say it, we're here, whether the OEM or the service provider, we're all here to make sure the customer experience is how the OEM wants it, and obviously that includes a functioning device. So, Darwin Garcia, I got one last question for you, friend. Which Motorola device is your favorite and why?
the razors, the foldables, right? The soon as those devices came back, I was the first one to use them. Took a little bit of while to get used to the flip, right? But once I'm on it, I can go back to the old device. So and they're very cool. So I'm on the foldables. Others took a little longer to shift, and I understand, right? The advantage I had, right? It sounds ironic, but is that if the device breaks, I can fix it. So
Right.
I didn't
Yeah,
have
that's
fear
true.
that if your foldable fail, that you're gonna be, oh my god, what am I gonna do now, right? Right. So kind of that explains why I was able to use them, right? Because I always knew if something happened, I can fix it or I have a backup that I can shift, right? So, but that's been my favorite project today, and the growth of the foldables have made is good in terms of both functionality and quality, right? Those devices are continue to gain ground and becoming the product that customers are looking more and more. I see them more and more on the trains and public areas.
Yeah.
So it tells me this, yes, the devices are becoming part of the typical form factor, something that took work to get there, right? But definitely they're moving in that direction to be more common. But
They are. I'm seeing them more and more, especially in the service department as well. I really appreciate you doing this. Thank you for coming on. I hope everybody that listens to this gets an interesting perspective and sees how much hard work you've put into building the service team at Motorola, and then actually delivering on some real things that have had a big impact across, I'm sure, the US, but also in service departments across the world that are fixing Moto products. So thank you, seriously.
no, thank you, Jonathan. Again, as I mentioned earlier, keep up the great work. Being the voice of the independence within the OEM and vice versa, right? I believe that long term will pay off significantly. So let's keep it. And I'll see you soon in the next conference.
Of course, Darwin. Darwin Garcia, everybody. Thanks again for joining,
Thank
friend.
you.